This video is sponsored by Mrs. Quilty.
No redesign project is quite as fun as a quilting redesign project. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's super fun and colorful and creative sewing project. I am so stoked about this. And if you're new to my channel, hello, welcome. My name is Madison, and here on my channel, I ascribe to inspire your creativity, help you grow your sewing skills, and encourage you to create and curate a wardrobe that you love, with it always being on a budget. And with that being said, in today's video, I'm going to be attempting to make the most possibly spectacular long quilted winter coat, and I'm so excited about this. I have had this project kind of on my mind for a while and just never got around to making it. This video was actually going to be an entirely different set of sewing projects, and then I remembered that my main sewing machine is not currently working right now for its buttonhole function, and I had to have a buttonhole function for the sewing projects that I was originally planning. So we pivoted to today's project, and honestly, this project kind of came to me as I was trying to fall asleep one night, and I remembered that I had this amazing quilt, and I remembered this quilt jacket that I had recently seen on Instagram, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're putting the two together and we're going to make the most fantastic jacket. So here's that quilt that I am talking about. Wow. How crazy. Okay, so this is a ginormous quilt. I haven't measured it. It might be a queen size quilt. I got this at Savers, I think last fall. I probably talked about it in a thrift haul video at some point last year, but I don't remember which one. And I got this for $16.99, which is a great steal for this quilt. So this quilt is made up of a ton of fabulous diamond cuts of fabric. They all converge in the middle of the quilt to be like a connecting print, and then they go out to the sides, still utilizing the same fabrics. And then it has a blue border and a pink back. And when I originally got this quilt, I got it because it wasn't too thick and it was a large quilt that I could do something really fun with. Originally, I was thinking about making pants out of this, but I just don't think that I would wear colorful quilted pants all that much. I feel like I've kind of gone away from the super duper funky fashion, and I am wanting pieces that are a lot more versatile and practical for my life, but that also have a lot of fun personality. So a colorful quilted winter jacket is obviously the perfect project, especially living in Wisconsin. So this is the quilt that I am working with today. And this quilt jacket is honestly inspired by a quilt jacket that I recently saw Charlotte Jackson post on her Instagram. So this is a picture of it. I've been following Charlotte for years. She's an amazing British fashion girly, and I am literally always obsessed with every single one of her outfits. And I think that she posted about this quilt jacket last year, and I loved it when I first saw it. And then recently she posted again, and I was just super inspired. It's just such a fun piece. I love that it's long. I've realized that long jackets are worth making or worth investing in because they really keep you so much warmer than a shorter jacket because your legs are covered. And so I thought this jacket of hers was so fun, and I thought it would be such a perfect shape and silhouette to make with this quilt. Now for this project, I'm going to be using a PDF pattern from Cara of Small Museum. She's a fabulous sewist and pattern designer that I've been following for a while on Instagram. She has a number of super cute sewing patterns, and the one that I'm going to be using for this project is her blanket coat pattern. I thought that this pattern was like the perfect, just basic, straight, long coat pattern. It has a little bit of a collar. There's actually two options for it. You can do a hood or you can do a little bit of a collar, and I want a collar for my jacket to kind of really pull from the inspiration of Charlotte's quilt coat. So I'm going to be using that PDF pattern for this project. And then one other adaptation I'm going to be making for this project, this is just a personal preference, is for this quilt. This quilt does have a batting on the inside because obviously it's a quilt. But I opened up one of the edges to see what the quilt batting was made out of. A lot of quilt batting is synthetic batting, which means it's essentially plastic. Nothing wrong with that. It's obviously way more affordable when you're quilting, but I personally prefer natural fibers whenever I have the option to choose them or integrate them into a project, and I love using cotton quilt batting. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this quilt apart and cut all my pattern pieces, cut my quilt lining that goes between the two fabric layers out of that cotton quilt lining, and then re-sew the jacket together. Since this quilt is just a tied quilt, it's not actually quilted together, it's going to be much easier to go in and cut out all those ties, separate the back fabric from the main fabric, and then put the new cotton quilt batting into this. So that is what we are going to start on today, and that is the project that we are diving into. So let's get started. And on the topic of quilting, I wanted to tell you about the Mrs. Quilty subscription box. The Mrs. Quilty box is the go-to box for quilters, crafters, and sewists. And if one of your New Year's goals is to learn how to quilt, this would be the perfect resource for you. This is my second box from Mrs. Quilty, and I'm so excited to get started on all the fun projects inside. I love that every single box contains high quality, colorful, and fun 100% cotton quilting fabric, with a variety of different prints for you to choose from and mix and match for every single project. In each box, you'll find a special magazine put together by Mrs. Quilty, filled with articles, tips, tricks, guides, and additional activities, in addition to step-by-step instructions and color illustrations for every quilting project that month. No matter if you're brand new to quilting or wanting to refresh your quilting skills, the easy-to-follow patterns and guides and brand new video tutorials are a perfect resource. I love that every month's box has projects for all levels of quilters, from beginners to advanced quilters. I usually like to start with a smaller quilting project every month and then work my way up to one of the larger quilting projects. I love that the theme for this month's box was book lover crafts, combining two things I love, reading and sewing. I decided to start off with one of the easy corner bookmark projects. After finishing my bookmark, I then decided to make the quilted book sleeve. I love using book sleeves to keep my books from being damaged when I carry them around, so this was the perfect project. It's always so fun going through all the different patterns included in every month's box and choosing the patterns that I want to mix and match together. This month especially had really cute color options. And to put my quilting skills to the test, I decided to sew up the block of the month. This specific quilting block pattern is called Rising Sun Quilt. I really enjoyed the geometry and art of piecing this quilt block together, and will definitely have to make more of these and start curating a collection of quilt blocks I can sew together to make an actual quilt in the future. It's no secret that I love sewing as my creative escape. So if you're looking for a fun creative escape this year and a way to learn a new sewing skill, I encourage you to check out the Mrs. Quilty subscription box. Every subscription box is actually a set sequence, so no matter if you subscribe today or later on next month, you will always start with box 1 and continue on with the sequence, getting fun new fabric prints, new tools, and fun quilting projects every month.
So what are you waiting for? A new year is the perfect time to learn a new skill, and don't forget to check the description of this video for a special discount code from Mrs. Quilty. And with that, let's dive back into my quilt jacket project. Alright, here's a video of the quilt all laid out so you can see all the fun colors. I think that I'm going to try and leave this section as like the back of the quilt, and then these sections are going to be the front, or I'm going to do it this way. But I think that I like the long kind of stripes as the pattern for the jacket. But check out all of these fun, cute little prints. This one is so cute. It has like this little pink girl in it. This one is really fun. It's almost like a cross stitch type of pattern. You have the green bandana. Just so many great vintage pieces of fabric for this, and I love all the colors. It's gonna go with everything. So like I mentioned before, I decided to replace the polyester quilt batting in this quilt with a cotton quilt batting, which meant that I had to take apart all of the ties, deconstruct this quilt, and then essentially rebuild the quilt sandwich. But I'm so glad that I did this, and it was at this very moment that I almost changed my mind and kept this quilt topper to make a dress instead of a jacket. But I decided to keep going with the jacket, and you're gonna be glad that I did, because I'm glad that I did as well. Something else that I opted to do for this specific project is actually print out my PDF pattern. Recently I've been projecting all of my patterns, but because I wanted a very specific layout for all of these pattern pieces on the quilt to really optimize the print characteristics, I decided to actually use the printable PDF pattern. So that meant that I had to assemble all of these pieces together. Now once all of my pattern pieces are ready to go, it was time to rebuild all of the quilt layers, which meant laying out the original quilt backing, putting down my new cotton quilt batting, making sure everything was all flat with no bumps, and then replacing the top quilts. As you can see, this is a very large quilt, but thankfully that meant I had a ton of pattern space to choose from when it came to laying out all of my different pattern pieces. I wanted to be very specific about how I laid all the different pieces so that the quilted squares would actually match up at the side seams and with the front panels. Not to mention that there were very specific sections of colored squares that I really wanted to integrate into the quilt, so I had to be very specific on how I laid my pattern pieces in order to showcase those. And as you can probably hear, I decided to use my electric scissors for this project. These are VLOXO electric fabric scissors, and I find that they are just so helpful when cutting through multiple layers of fabric or thick fabric. It significantly cuts down the cutting time and makes sure that you actually have really crisp, straight cutting lines, because these are obviously powerful enough to cut through all of those layers. So satisfying. Okay, so the main part that I wanted to focus on for this quilt was integrating this really vibrant section of the center of the quilt. So I made sure to cut my back pieces perfectly centered on the center of this quilt to have a really cool back. Then I placed my sleeve pattern pieces and made sure I cut them mirrored. Alright, I now have all the pieces for the coat cut out, so now it's time to start sewing them together. Okay, now that all my pieces are cut out, I'm trying to decide how exactly I want to construct this. The construction directions are super duper easy. The only modification I'm making is that the original directions have you finish all the seams with bias tape, which I love. I think it's a brilliant idea, but it's going to take a lot of extra time sewing, and that would also mean that I would have to buy more bias tape or make more bias tape, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to finish all of the seams on my serger just with an overlocking stitch, which is an option as well. I am going to use bias tape around all of the edges. Okay, so I'm going to use red bias tape around the edges of this coat. One of my favorite colors in this coat are the pops of red. I just think they're so pretty, and if you've been following me for any amount of time, you know that I love a good pop of red. So I'm going to use red bias tape to edge it. I just bought this bias tape. It's wide single fold bias tape, which the directions call for double fold bias tape, which essentially comes out to this. They're just pressed differently. So anyways, I'm going to edge it all in this so we'll have this really fun pop. The other modification that I'm doing, based on my inspiration for this jacket, which was Charlotte Jackson, again, I shared that photo at the beginning, but I'll pop it up here again, is that she had this fun, just belted tie. So I cut out a long strip of the quilt as well. I'll probably put like little belt loops on the side seams to run this through, but I thought that this was just going to be nice because it really allows you to kind of cinch it in if you want to cinch waist, or wear it actually like a blanket jacket and have it more baggy. So I cut this out. I think it's like 56 inches wide or something. So there's that. Also, this original jacket is just kind of like a throw-on jacket. It doesn't have ties as closures or buttons or anything like that. But again, per the inspiration of this jacket, her jacket closes in the front either by buttons or by snaps. And the whole reason that I decided to opt for this sewing project is that my main sewing machine actually needs to go get serviced right now because the hand wheel is like stuck and not turning, which means that it doesn't sew, and that is a machine that has my automatic buttonhole flip. So I thought for a jacket it would be really fun to do snaps, specifically gold snaps. So I picked up these gold snaps at Walmart. They're very similar to the snaps that I have gotten at Joann Fabrics before. Walmart is closer, Joann Fabrics is like an hour away. So I'm going to use gold snaps down the front, and I think it's going to add a really fun kind of pop to this jacket. Okay, so like I was saying in regards to the construction of this, because this was originally a tied quilt, I cut out all of the ties so that I could replace the polyester quilt batting with cotton quilt batting, and I am so glad that I did that.
but that also means that I'm working with 3 different layers of fabric. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to baste around all of like the necklines, the armholes, down the sides, and down the bottoms, essentially connecting and sewing all 3 layers together around the edges. That does leave everything really loose in between and in the middle of all of the pieces. So I guess I will see how that kind of actually behaves once I start constructing and sewing the jacket together. If I feel like there's a lot of movement, I'm going to have to figure out what I want to do to actually quilt all of those layers together. Originally I was thinking of just going in with like vertical lines or horizontal lines, but considering that this quilt is actually a diagonal quilt, I think that I would actually want to sew around the square diamond shapes. So I was thinking about maybe just going in random places and sewing around the square so that there's just a couple pops of quilting, or I could just go sewing around the diagonal. So anyways, I guess I'm gonna figure that out as I start constructing and sewing this together. So anyways, with all that being said, I'm going to dive into this jacket. I will show you some of the construction steps along the way. But again, I am using the PDF blanket pattern from Small Museum, and Kara's directions are super helpful, really easy to follow. This is honestly like a super duper easy jacket. So if you decide to make this for yourself, her instructions are pretty no-brainer, but you'll see the adaptations I make along the way as well. And it just started snowing outside, so now we have a fun cozy winter view.
I started off this project by sewing the belt that I am creating for this jacket. I essentially cut a section that was a couple inches wide by however long I ended up actually making this, and then folding it in half with the quilt batting, sewing it together, and then I'm going to flip it right side out later on. I also created my 2 pocket pieces. These are created the same way, essentially a square of all 3 layers of the quilt, but I placed the quilt face and the pink right sides together, sewed them around, left an opening, and then I'm going to flip those right side out, poke out all of the corners, and then I'm going to have really nice and finished quilt edges that I can essentially just sew straight onto my jacket. For my next step, I basted all 3 of the layers for each panel together. So essentially this is the quilt back, the quilt center, and the quilt face. Because this quilt is no longer quilted anymore, I wanted to make sure these layers didn't shift on me as I was constructing the entire jacket, so I just basted around the shoulders, the neck, the center front, the sides, and the bottom.
Okay, so I basted all of the layers together just around the edges so that my fabric won't shift and move. I did that for the front and for the back pieces. And then I also sewed my pockets together and pinned them to the front panels. Somehow the patterns on the pockets actually perfectly align with and kind of match up with the patterns on the front, and so I really love how this pattern ties in to the quilting right here, and then over here it's more of a contrast. I just think that's so fun. So now I'm just going to go and stitch around the sides and the bottom to lock those pockets into place. Also, this is what the quilted tie came out looking like. I just folded the long strip with the quilt batting in half, and so it's extra chunky and nice. I was trying to look at the picture of the original coat that I'm using as inspiration, and her tie looks a lot like this. So I love how this turned out. I think all of the colors that I incorporated into it are so fun, and it's going to be really cute tied around. Okay, so aside for the front panel, this is what the back panel is looking like. The back panel is a little bit more vibrant in the colors, and I really love it. I love this bright section right here and the little greens on the side. So between that and the front, this is going to be a very colorful jacket.
Since the pockets are pinned to the front of my jacket, I'm just going to sew around at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance along the sides and the bottom of my pockets, leaving the top open. And now that the front and the back of my jacket are basted together, I'm going to take those front panels and I'm going to place them right sides together along the back of my jacket, matching up the side seams and the shoulders and pinning them into place. After they're pinned into place, I'm going to sew these together at my sewing machine to really create the jacket. And once all of those seams are sewn, I'm going to finish those raw edges with an overlocking stitch on my serger. Again, the original pattern calls for finishing your seams with bias tape, but I am opting for a serged finish. And after those seams were finished, I took my jacket over to my iron and gave those seams a nice press from the right side of my jacket. And now that the main shell of my jacket is constructed, it's time to sew together the sleeves. The sleeves are super easy. I just folded them in half, matching up the right sides of my quilt, and then I'm going to just be sewing down the underarm stitch of my sleeves. And just like the main jacket, I'm going to be finishing these raw edges with my serger. Now that my sleeves and the main portion of my jacket are sewn together at the shoulders and side seams, it is time to attach my sleeves to my jacket. I first start off with matching up the side seam and the underarm seam of my sleeve, and then slowly working that sleeve curve into the armhole of the jacket. Once the sleeves were set into the armholes of my jacket, I just stitched around the opening at my sewing machine. And this is what the sleeves look like once they were sewn into my jacket. I also finished the raw edges of my sleeve seams with a serger as well. And this is what the inside looks like. The next step was creating the collar. Like all of my other pieces, I cut out my collar through all 3 layers of this quilt. So I'm going to take the pink quilt backing and I'm actually going to move it to the right side of my collar. I'm going to pin around these straight edges and I'm going to sew those with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Once the layers of my collar were sewn together, it was time to flip it right side out. But before I did that, I actually went in and I trimmed all of the layers shorter than I sewed them, especially the quilt batting layer. I trimmed that down pretty much to the seam. I did this in order to reduce the bulk around the edges of my collar once I flipped it right side out. And you will see that it flipped really, really well and the edges were really crisp and straight. After this, I gave my collar a good press on my iron, and here's what the collar looks like. Now it's ready to be attached to my jacket. Now the method of attaching this collar was a little bit different because I'm going to be edging all of my raw edges with bias tape. So this collar is actually attached to the neckline with the right side of the collar matching the wrong side of the inside of the jacket. So essentially the seam is going to be a raw edge around the back of the neck under the collar. The reason for this is that after I sewed that, I then pinned my bias tape around the entire edge of my jacket. So this is going to cover and enclose every single raw edge on the front of my jacket, the bottom, and right underneath the collar. Using bias tape to finish off the raw edges of my jacket truly gave it an elevated pop, especially using red, and I'm so glad I went with the color red because it really just brought to life all the vibrancy in this quilt. Now for stitching this bias tape around my jacket, I simply stitched in the crease of one of the opened edges of my bias tape. It was about 1/4 of an inch. After I stitch all the way around my jacket, I'm then just going to fold and press my bias tape around the raw edges of my jacket, pin that into place, and then stitch in the ditch to lock that bias tape edging into place. Now for the bias tape underneath my collar, I actually added an additional stitch on the other side of my bias tape to really just lock that into place so it wouldn't stick out. After the collar was done, I added in a new construction detail for this jacket by creating cuffs for the bottom openings of my sleeves. My sleeves were just really baggy and open at the edges of my sleeve, so I created this cuff using the quilt batting on one edge so it would still have the quilted effect, and then I placed that cuff over the opening edge of my sleeve and then folded and kind of pleated the wider end of my sleeve into the sleeve cuff. Now this cuff was not a part of the original pattern, but it was super easy to create and add into this jacket.
Alright, it is day I think like 2-ish working on this jacket. I'm actually super surprised at how quick this project has gone. Obviously, like, I think the majority of the project timing was literally just like taping the pattern together and doing all the cutting. Sewing though has been pretty easy. So the last thing that I have to do today is figure out the snap placement. So for this jacket originally didn't have snaps or buttons in the front. It's more kind of a throw-on jacket with a fold down collar. I did raise the neckline on this jacket so that I could kind of have it close at the top with the collar based on, again, my original jacket inspiration from Charlotte Jackson. So I'm going to figure out the snaps for this jacket for them to close how I want it to. And then also what I did yesterday is I added kind of cuffs to the bottom of the jacket, and I'm going to show you what those look like because I honestly think those elevated the jacket so much. So that was an adaptation that I made to the original pattern in addition to the snaps that I'm adding. So yeah, here's those cuffs because I think that change in the jacket actually elevated it a lot. Okay, I don't want to show you like the whole jacket yet because I'm filming the reveal today. This jacket pattern was curated to be like very oversized. I made a size X small based on the size chart. I probably could have gotten away with making like a 2X small, but I also have hips that are in the higher size range, so I wanted to make sure that like the longer portion of the jacket still fit how I wanted. So I will say, with the way that this jacket is created to fit, the sleeves are very roomy, and so the bottom of my sleeve was like very baggy and I wanted it to be a little bit more fitted. So I just kind of created a little bit of a cuff on the bottom of my sleeve. I don't even remember what the measurement ended up being for this, but I wanted something that fit tighter around my wrist so it wouldn't be so baggy, and I really love how it looks. I think, again, it just elevates this jacket. And then I just put like 4 little pleats to fit the wider opening of the sleeve into my little cuff, and I just hand sewed it on the inside because it's so tight and small it wouldn't fit onto my sewing machine, but that also meant that I don't have seams on the outside, so I really love that. So that was an adaptation that I made in addition to the tie on this jacket and the snaps that I'm going to do now on the jacket.
Okay, so these are my like snap pliers. These are just from Joann's. It's the Dritz 24P heavy duty snap pliers. They give you all of these different tools for you to just press and stamp the snaps together. I did get my snaps from Walmart, but these are compatible with the snap pliers. So essentially you just follow the directions in here or on the back of the snaps that I got. So essentially what I have to do is figure out my placement, punch holes, which you can do with these pliers, which is really helpful. This part right here will actually punch holes in my fabric. And then I use this little black addition that I connect onto here that becomes like a clamp, and this clamps around it to like hold it together, and then the actual snap portion are these other 2 pieces. So anyways, it's a little weird and complicated to explain that. The direction on the snap packaging or on the plier packaging is going to be the easiest to follow and figure out what to do. Now I only have 7 snaps, so I am gonna figure out my placement for 7 snaps down the front of my jacket. For the placement of my snaps on this jacket, I started all the way at the top of the jacket and then went down to about my knee, spacing out my snaps 5 inches apart. And then outside of the 5-inch spacing, my snaps were about 3/4 of an inch away from my red bias tape edging. After I figured out my snap placements, I went through and punched holes into those specific snap placements and then installed my snaps on one side and then my opposite snap on the other side. So as you can see, my snap face is on the right side of my jacket, and then my connection is on the left side. So my jacket closes from right to left. After my snaps were installed, this jacket was done, so it is time for the official reveal to show you my coat of many colors quilt jacket. Alright, well, what do we think about this fabulous quilt jacket? I have to say that this is probably my new favorite jacket, and I was also surprised with how warm it was over the correct winter layers. This jacket is giving me all of the vibrant and cheerful and character-filled Scandinavian vibes, and I honestly love that so much. This pattern was so easy to sew, and I am so glad that I finally got to bring this amazing quilt jacket to life. I hope that you enjoyed this sewing video, seeing the process of how I turned a thrifted quilt into a wonderful quilt jacket. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in to watch this brand new sewing video. I would love to hear from you if you have ever made a quilt jacket or if you plan to in the future, so drop a comment down below. Make sure that you're subscribed to my channel also so that you don't miss out on new videos in the future. See you in the next one. Happy sewing. Bye.